I think the idea of saying I'm subject teacher X and that's what I do, that's an antiquated model of what a teacher looks like in 2025. I think teachers really are much more about like caring for the whole child through the lens of their subject. I think one of the things people are struggling with now, especially maybe in more senior level classes, is this notion of like what to think versus how to think. I think divorcing yourself from your own personal biases and beliefs in our highly polarized political climate is a tricky thing to do. So how do you treat your classroom as a space where voices can be heard, things can be challenged, but you're not necessarily proselytizing or bringing in your own personal belief and bias in a way that might actually undermine the psychological safety for another kid.
One misconception about education. Right?
We're not agile enough because we are. Like we went online very quickly, not necessarily in the best way possible, and the circumstances around it were not great. But I think there's this notion of like education's like an oil tanker. It takes years and years to turn it. I think if we really find the right motivation, we can be far more nimble and agile than we think we are. Cool.
All right. Well, welcome. Tanay, thank you so much for your time, for spending.
Of course, happy to be here.
Your vacation. In some
summer
shape
break.
Or form. Best vacation ever, right?
Totally.
Who would have thought, right?
Yeah, like I'm on a podcast. This is the best.
Yeah,
exactly.
Awesome. Well, I, again, we were talking about this behind the cameras as well, but I think there's a lot of mutuals between us, and you've had quite an inspiring journey. For those that have never met you before, which I'm sure are very few because a lot of people know you, but for those that haven't met you or are new to your story, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into this beautiful world of education?
Yeah, I mean, thanks. Inspiring might be dramatic, but I appreciate the sentiment. To me. Fair enough. Thank you. I'm third culture kid. So my mom is an international school teacher, still is, in fact, and my dad worked in industry, and we lived in the Philippines for 13 years as a kid. I lived in Thailand. I lived in Malaysia. I lived in Vietnam, which I know we'll talk about in a bit. So I was very fortunate that I got to attend international schools for the entirety of my schooling. And that's such a gift and such a privilege. And I'm always going to be forever indebted to my parents for that. And, through that journey, I always kind of, partly because my mom's a teacher, I just like my orbit was largely teachers, right? Just by family, by friends. And so when I came to Canada for university, I kind of did everything I could to not become a teacher. We called it the teacher's kid curse, right? I really tried to be like, I'm not going to do this. And, I did a master's in history thinking that I might stretch that into more formal academia. It didn't really fit with me. I didn't feel that was the right space for me. I did, almost 2 years in the corporate world doing, working for a software company and just doing some consulting and account management. And I think the parts of all those experiences, whether it was being a TA in grad school, and the software company I worked for was an educational software company. So actually I was working a lot with teachers, and it just kind of occurred to me that actually the thing I love doing the most is being in that teaching and coaching space. So I did eventually succumb to the teacher's kid curse. I applied to Teachers College. We were living in Toronto. I applied to U of T, got in at OISE. But I'm really grateful I had other experiences before moving into teaching. So I was a little bit into my late 20s by the time I got into teaching. And I think those broader range of experiences really, I think, helped shape me and gave me a unique set of skills that I think really helped serve me well when I got into the classroom. So we've talked a lot about her behind the scenes, but I got hired for my first teaching job at Branksome Hall. I remember going to the job fair. I don't know if they still have them. They used to be up at the old science center, which I know is no longer there. But I went to the job fair and I met Rosemary Evans, the director of academics at Branksome at the time. And we just really hit it off. And I remember going home and I remember saying to my wife, like, if I get a job, I'm like a history and English teacher, right? You could throw a rock and hit 100 of us at that point. But I remember going to my wife and said, if I feel like I'm going to get a job, I think it might be with Rosemary and Branksome. I just really felt like there was something there. And very fortunately, I did get hired at Branksome. I got a history and English and TOK role there. I was there for 6 years. And then, moved on to a leadership role at Toronto French School, where I was the diploma coordinator and then became the vice principal, the IB diploma coordinator. And that was an incredible experience as well. It was such a really kind of different environment. It was co-ed, bilingual, different way to grow my skill set. And then one thing that I think, will surface through other questions is I'm always curious about all aspects of schools, right? Like I've done curriculum. I've been in the classroom. I've been a CAS coordinator. And I think the one thing that I was really curious about was experiential learning. Like, how do we get kids to learn deeply outside of the classroom? And around that time, at the end of my third year at TFS, a role came up at Havergal College to be the director of the Forum for Change, which was an experiential learning hub founded on the principles of social justice and equity, which were, again, things that are really passionate and important to me. And it just felt like a really natural fit. So I applied for that job, and I was very fortunate that I was hired into that role. And I was there for 2 years. And it's interesting, those 2 years, we built a whole global learning and leading diploma. We had an incredible team of people there. And then the back half of that second year was the pandemic, was when COVID, the shutdown happened. So and then in between all that, that itch to go abroad never kind of really went away. And in November 2019, I successfully recruited for my current role, which is to be the secondary school deputy principal for teaching and learning at the United Nations International School in Hanoi, which happens to be a school that I attended. God, I'm dating myself, but almost 30, more than 30 years ago as a sixth grade student. So it was nice kind of to come back to that. But yeah.
No, that's such an incredible story.
Yeah.
I mean, did you, when you were first moving into education in your late 20s, was there ever this doubt that, is it too late? Like, is there a point now? Because I assume, it's not an easy decision to say, you know what, I had a degree, I had a full-time job, I'm working, I'm earning.
Yeah.
But scratch all that, I'm going to go to teacher's college.
Yeah, and I just gotten married too.
Yeah,
the summer before I went to teacher's college, I was like, oh, I've made a terrible... No, I think that's a really good question. Like I said, when I kind of did the Venn diagram of all the things I felt strong in terms of my skill set and the things that I was passionate about doing, teaching was pretty much the most obvious track. So by the time, even though I didn't have like a super significantly like long and robust career outside of education, I definitely felt like by the time I made the decision, it felt like the right one because it didn't feel like a forced decision. I felt like I knew I'd done enough other things to make it feel like that was the right choice. I do laugh. I do feel like I was like the elder statesman in my OISE cohort. Like I think I was definitely, maybe not definitely, but certainly one of the only ones that was, married, that had life before getting there. So even though I wasn't that old, I was like 26 or 27, it just felt like many of my classmates who have gone on to their own incredible careers in public and independent education, many of them had come straight out of university, kind of like done their 4-year degree and then went straight to teacher's college. So I'm glad I had a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Kind of that break in between.
Yeah. I think it also adds a bit probably more depth in terms of the way that you approach education.
For sure.
Maybe even in some ways your passion for taking kids outside the classroom and experiencing life beyond that, right?
100%, for sure.
And talk to us about Hanoi. I mean, I went to Vietnam for a vacation.
Yeah.
Selfishly, it was wonderful.
Yeah, it's great.
I felt really rich there.
Yeah.
Because of the currency.
Yeah.
What's that experience like? I mean, I know you had an itch to go abroad.
Yeah.
I have an itch too, but sometimes it's not like as easy as said than done.
For sure.
But what was that like for you?
I mean, I think it's also worth noting that it was a 10-year runway to kind of make it happen, right? Like I think I tried for many years to find a role that was more suited to teaching before, to find an overseas job teaching. And I applied to some great schools and always made it pretty far down the road, was always kind of like the finalist. And one of the challenges in international education is that you are sometimes looking at the like what we call the family constellation, right? Like I have 2 daughters who at the time were entering school age, who are certainly now school age. My wife is not a teacher, and at the economic level, I'm an expensive hire for a teaching position. But again, when you talk about things like mentorship and feedback, things that are so important to me, I had a head of school at a school where I was unsuccessful reach out to me, and he said, I really believe you should be in international education, and I hope it happens for you. But I think if you're going to do it, you need to look at leadership, like look at the leadership track. He says, like, we tend to just focus more on the candidate, and then we look at the family constellation afterwards, as opposed to kind of teaching couples and that recruitment matrix. And that was really invaluable advice. And again, so grateful for that. Those people who kind of tap you on the shoulder and say, I think here's one way to make it happen. And that kind of like, I really feel like, honestly, I started there 16 years ago. I could still be at Branksome. It was such an incredible school, such great people. Yeah. But that was kind of my impetus to leave. It was to seek more opportunity in leadership. And that's why I left and was successful in getting a leadership role. And so I built my leadership career for 5 years before reapplying to go internationally. And I think his advice played out. So by the time I applied for leadership roles, or certainly middle to senior leadership roles, I felt I was getting a lot more traction between the experience as a leader and just kind of those practical realities of,
became more accessible opportunities, right?
Totally. So I applied for 2 jobs in November 2019. The world was a very different place. I remember applying for my jobs. And so in Hanoi has been amazing. Like, it's just been an absolute gift. I mean, it's coming at the start of my 6th year, and sometimes I still pinch myself that we're there. It's a vibrant city. It's a beautiful chaos. I do like
organized chaos.
A beautiful chaos, a little bit organized in some ways. But, I think for me, the thing that, and this is true of many of the schools that I worked at, but one of the things that makes it so empowering is it's just an incredible community. Like, the community is shaped by the people and the faculty and the students and my colleagues at the school. I've said on another podcast sometimes that the overlap between my personal life and my professional life, there's like zero, like that Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Those circles fit right on top of each other.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because I think ultimately actually it makes for really a powerful, and you can really lean on each other in sort of times of personal and professional challenges, and celebrate, with people as well. And so Hanoi has been just an absolute gift for me and my family to be there. My kids get to go to school with me, and my daughter's locker is right outside my office. She hates it, but that's okay. So it's good. It's been really fun.
Is there something that, if you had the ability to, you would bring from Hanoi in terms of their education system and bring it to Canada? What would that be?
Oh, I think the reason I find I felt very ease onboarding into a place like UNIS Hanoi was, I think, because of the incredible training I'd received from the 3 schools I'd been at. Just like training both in terms of the early stages of my career, the leadership training. There's a lot of similarity between how international schools are run and how independent schools in Toronto, certainly the 3 that I worked at, are run. I think the one aspect of life in Hanoi, both at a student and teacher level, is there's just a lot more opportunity for professional travel, to go see other schools in action, to be at conferences. And so that's been a real blessing, to just kind of like have real kind of like chances to see other schools all over the world in action, learn, absorb from them, and bring that back. And I recognize some of the barriers and limitations for why that can't always be part of the ethos, or that might not always be accessible in Ontario or in Toronto schools. But I think I'm starting to see more of it happen already. So I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I've had so many guests that at least have had international experience and then come back to Canada.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not yet back, but you never know, right? You never know what life has in store for you.
You never know, exactly.
But you mentioned earlier that you went back to the school that you were at 30 or so years ago.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, you're going back now, not to go to school, but to teach or to educate and sort of lead. What was that feeling like?
It's interesting. People who've known me for a long time would actually say that we spent 1 year in Hanoi. We spent the 93-94 school year in Hanoi. I was a grade 6 student. It was probably the most difficult year of my childhood. We had just left the Philippines. We'd been there for 11 years. I had a really great set of friends.
And your friends. And as a kid, that's the hardest thing.
It was so hard. You're absolutely right. Like, so we moved and I felt really lost. And the school at the time was much, much smaller than the school I'd left. I'd left the international school in Manila, and we went to UNIS Hanoi. It was, I think, less than 10 years old when I went there.
It's a new school.
It was a very new school. It was established in 1988. My comms team will probably fact check me, but I'm pretty sure on that. And so it was less than 10 years old. I think there were maybe somewhere in the range of like 60 to 70 students total. It was a completely different place. But it was, again, you look back on these opportunities. I lived in Hanoi the year the U.S. lifted the embargo. And to see that experience firsthand was just unbelievable.
Right.
What's also wild is we left Vietnam in June 1994, and I didn't come back until July 2020.
Yeah.
Even
the country has almost transformed.
So people are like, oh, it's like you're going back. I'm like, no, and because the country has changed dramatically in the 26 years that since I'd been gone. The schools certainly have. We now have somewhere in the range of 1,100 kids. We're in a completely different campus where EY to grade 12. We run 3 IB programs. Like it's just so
incredible.
There's this really beautiful like piece of like feeling like you're coming back to a place. And what's especially cool is my mom taught there. So that part is kind of nice.
Yeah.
But in many ways, it really isn't the same place that I left because it just felt so different. And so, yeah, so there's that nice connection that's there.
Yeah.
But it's also nice because in many ways I'm experiencing it the way most people will who are new to it.
Yeah.
It's just like through fresh eyes.
For someone that is maybe thinking right now about pursuing international education, what advice would you give them? Is there something you think you did really well that you're like, thank God I did that? Or there's something like, oh my God, I really should have done that or thought about that?
I think learning about as much of the organization you're in and learning as much of all aspects of it is really kind of just gives you a lot more to speak to when you're in a situation where you're interviewing. So when I was, in the 3 schools I worked at, I kind of mentioned I did curriculum, I did CAS coordination, in addition to teaching course leadership, vice principal. So I'd had a wider range of opportunities rather than sort of like being singularly focused in one thing. I guess what's also true, it just depends on what role you're applying for, right? So if you're applying for a teaching job, then I think definitely, having experience, many countries actually have a minimum number of years you need to have been teaching in order to get a work permit or a work visa. So you need to really understand the context. You need to understand the context you're going into. Like, are these schools that, what do they offer tuition if you have children? What, you really need to. So I guess the most obvious answer, which is true of any place you apply, but really do your research.
Yeah.
Right. Like I saw your post the other day about like when you were looking for your internship and like you really went out there and you understood them better than themselves. And like when we do our interviews, like that really stands out. Like the teacher and candidates,
you can always tell when someone's
100%. Like they really know it and it feels. And then the other piece is I think, being open to different opportunities. I think for me, when I decided to go abroad, like we had a pretty tight box of like location and schools that we would consider for a variety of practical, familial, logistical reasons, right? So we had nothing to lose by seeking an opportunity abroad, but I only applied to like 3 or 4, maybe actually by the time I did, I only applied to 2 schools and I'd had a short list of 5. Right. And they were partly because I wanted to be in Asia, which is close to where my parents live. I had,
you had your own set of like.
Yeah. We just said, so have a clear sense of criteria.
Yeah.
And also, like, this sounds like contradictory advice, and then be open. Right. Like, if it hadn't worked out that first round, then maybe we would have had to go back to the drawing board and be like, actually, would we consider other places? Will we consider the African continent? Will we look at Europe? Will we consider South America? What's the motive? Like, and then, what's your motivation for wanting to go abroad? Like for us, as we wanted to see the world, I think you gain so much empathy from seeing and experiencing other cultures. Like, and that was something we wanted to give to our kids. We're very fortunate. We lived in Toronto. It's an unbelievably diverse and our kids went to public school, and that was a really diverse and varied experience for them. So they were getting that already, but I just think that, like, again, that experiential piece, being on the ground, seeing things in action for the first time, like that's where that real kind of like you develop that cultural competency and that that empathetic understanding. So those are things we were looking for.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, you're completely moving your life away, right? So
totally.
there's a lot that goes behind just saying, okay, pack bags and go, So that's totally fair. From our research, we understood that there's only 2 UN schools in the world.
That's right.
UNIS is one of them.
Yes.
For those that don't know, like myself, what does that mean? I mean, UN's pretty cool. I know the SDGs. I got that. What does it mean to be a UN?
No, that's a great question. I think that's something that, we as an organization kind of like, what does it mean to be a UN school? I think the SDGs actually are a big part of it. And I know, we don't have the market cornered on embedding SDGs in the curriculum. Like, I recognize that, but I think we do it deeply and authentically and consistently at our school. So there's like a real kind of like ethos and mindset around really trying to make the world a better place. Like, that's baked into our school's mission, vision, and values. And I think the same is true of many organizations. The other UN school is in New York. We've established, small partnerships with them. We send kids on exchange. They'll come to us. We'll go to them every other year. So we're rebuilding those connections, especially post-COVID, when we couldn't travel for the way we were able to previously. I think, the school's history is that it was established by the UN as Vietnam was reopening. after the years of conflict.
Yeah.
It was a way to have a space for potential diplomats and NGO workers to
Oh.
have their students be educated.
Oh, okay.
So the origin story of the school is really kind of around the sense of service, around the sense of like people were there in order to give back as part of the UN and NGOs. And I think that is one of the things that I think people really want to come to UNIS Hanoi for, is because there is such a deep commitment to service. There's really a deep commitment to kind of really trying to, through the lens of the environment, through the lens of equity and equality, eradicating poverty. Like you ask, and if you ask kids, especially in the elementary school at UNIS Hanoi, they can like name the SDGs by logos.
Yeah.
So they really deeply know them, and I think that's a part that makes the school's sort of connection to the UN. And of course, now that we're trying to that we have strong programs and we have strong systems, we're really trying to deepen our connection with the NGO organizations within the city of Hanoi. So like really trying to kind of build those connections with aid agencies and getting kids out there and kind of getting them to see firsthand, what work looks like in the context of, development and supporting a fast rising economy and country like Vietnam is.
Yeah. I'd love to double click into that, because I know that, the SDG goals are international, right? That's the challenges that we have to solve in the world.
Yeah.
A lot of schools value them, whether they are UN or not, right? It's something that's so fundamental. From your perspective, what does it look like in action when we say that we are does that mean like every time I go to math class, I have to like link a UN goal to my algebra? Like what does that like depth look like in terms of connection to the curriculum?
It might be like, I think, and depending on the division, I think that curriculum connection is really important. So we have, in our unit planning, we do invite teachers to think about what are some links to the SDGs. One of the things that I think where it really manifests is through our incredible service learning program.
Okay.
We have students in the secondary involved in service all the way from grade 6 to 12.
Oh, wow.
So that's when I say the word mandatory, they just love doing it. Like that's the thing that they really feel, where they build those community connections, they deepen their connection to our host culture.
And that's sort of like they're going and working with NGOs and like...
In some cases, yes. Like aid organizations or different, sometimes they're more granular. They can be even within the school. There's a wide range of what different sort of service groups look like in our school. So that commitment to service, I think, is really part of, again, that embedded ethos. And again, so yeah, you might see maybe even a better example. So the capstones of the PYP and the MYP are the PYP exhibition and the personal project.
Right.
So every kid in grade 5 and grade 10, when they do the PYPX and the personal project and the MYP,
right,
the facilitators of those processes, the PYPX and the PP, the personal project, they're inviting students to think about what is the connection to an SDG. So it's kind of always in there, right? And again, you're seeing more and more schools do things like this. So again, like I said, I wouldn't say we have, we don't have the exclusive copyright or the market cornered on it, but I really think it's been part of the mindset and ethos of the school for so long. In terms of, what makes it a UN school.
For a school that wants to start introducing the SDG goals as part of its curriculum, a part of its programming, but has never done so before. What does day 1, 2, and 3 look like for them?
I think day 1 is knowing what the SDGs are, and that sounds obvious. There are a number of them, and then looking at what are the natural connections that can be embedded. And I think the other thing that I believe is true is that a lot of times, and I maybe feel a little bit biased as a social science teacher, that sometimes we tend to park these things in certain classes, like, oh, maybe this is a good connection for history or geography or
we
economic.
Make these assumptions.
Or maybe, we'll put that in an English class or an arts class. But I believe, and I know it's true because I've seen it in action. You use the example. You can embed SDGs into math instruction. You can do it into science. You can do it into physics. There's so many different ways you can think about the SDGs. So really kind of like through that interdisciplinary lens, picking a couple and going deep, so mapping it out. Day 2 would be like in grade 6, what are the ones we want to focus on? And then kind of like building that kind of scope and sequence of what's the best way to engage and tackle the SDGs over the course of a couple of years, right? So you want to get them deep to that kind of deepen that knowledge as opposed to feel like you did it at a surface
and
level.
It's also not like I just have to tick a box.
Exactly.
13, tick.
Exactly.
12,
done.
tick.
I've solved that problem, right?
Yeah. I think it's...
I mean, and I think, and I think teachers would feel this, and I'm certainly sure they'd say this maybe they wouldn't say it if you had them on the podcast, but the goal is never to add more work, but to deepen the work that's happening and making it
more
feel
meaningful.
Authentic connection, right? That's what it's about. I think the SDGs are beautiful that way because they actually do give so many opportunities to really think about what are the ways in which you can embed authentically SDGs because they are quite pliable. Right? They're malleable in terms of where they fit in the classroom.
Yeah. Can I ask a bit of a fun question?
Sure.
Which SDG goal is the hardest you have found to fit? Like you always struggle with that one. You're like, oh my God. Oh, that one's like, I have to do a lot of work to think about it.
I think one of them is like partnership for all the goals, right? Like that's like the one that summarizes all this together. I feel like there's one that's kind of like the final goal. It's like, we're going to do it all. Yeah. And I'm like, well, I feel like if we tackle all these ones. So I think, and that's the one that's bringing them all together. So the goals in and of themselves.
That might look different than the others.
Exactly. Like, and the goals in and of themselves like require support of the other goals to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. No, I find that very interesting because I also noticed that a lot of schools in Canada are starting to put a focus on it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's important to be like, okay, how do we do that in the right way?
Totally.
Right? And I feel like I've always believed that there are schools that have done it.
Yeah.
Like, there's no need to recreate the whole wheel. Right?
Yeah.
Like, just
100%.
Let's see what others have done.
Yeah.
Let's learn from that. And then we pick and choose what makes more sense for us.
And I talked about that's been one of the greatest professional development opportunities I've had in my time being at UNIS is getting to see other schools in action, right? Like being able to like just spend a couple of days on a different campus, learn from what they're engaged with, and find small micro things you can bring back.
Yeah,
to
it's
your
powerful.
Own organization. Totally.
No,
totally.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And your role, and I'll say it out again because I think it's sort of you mentioned in the start, but deputy principal for teaching and learning.
Yeah, in the secondary school.
In the secondary
grade
school,
6 to 12.
6 to 12. Okay. Yeah. What does that like? What does your job look like? Blatantly. I mean, I think. It sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
Sounds very innovative.
Yeah.
What would you be doing on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning?
What I really try to do is spend as much time in our classrooms and just seeing great learning and teaching in action. And that can sometimes be through just, formal or informal observations, doing walkthroughs. I found that one of my favorite things is there were sort of like micro coaching conversations where a teacher would kind of come in and be like, I was thinking about this and I just wanted to run an idea past you. And we'll kind of like just do a quick, quick, almost mini,
back on napkin.
Yeah, it's kind of like, let's sketch this out. Like put it on the board. If we did it this way, what would you be hoping to get? And these sort of mini conversations that I feel like, I hope my colleagues who see this would believe this to be true. Like, walking into my door, don't walk into the door, but walking through the door and be like, hey, let's bounce this idea. So really just kind of like ongoing teacher coaching and again, not because I'm an expert, but it's just that idea of to be a sounding board.
Yeah.
Right. Like, hey, let's think about this. One of the things I love about my job, and I think maybe is a little bit reflects the leadership structure and the leadership ethos in our organization is I don't feel like each year has looked very different. And I think that's a good thing. I recognized when I first got there, it was July 2020, for the 20, so really the first year was, and COVID had a weird arc in Vietnam because in from basically August 2020, or really actually just dial it back, really from May 2020 till May 2021, there was no COVID in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Because they shut down their borders. They had very strict
Schools were
protocols.
in person still? Or?
Schools were in person.
Yeah.
We were without masks for the most part. So we I did my 14 days of hotel quarantine when we moved to Vietnam, which is a story for a later point.
Yeah.
But
I've done that too. It's absolutely
right. And so we did the 14 days. But then I kind of joked, it was like walking into a time machine where it was 2019 again.
Yeah.
Because, things were open, schools were open.
It felt normal.
Normal. But in that first year, I was new. We were figuring it out. We had 3 out of our 4 members of our secondary leadership team were new that year.
Yeah.
And then there's this anvil of COVID hanging over your head. When is the outbreak going to happen? Because you kind of knew that.
Yeah,
you just seen the arc in other countries, right? So when...
Neighboring countries.
Exactly. And so when COVID ripped through basically my second year, which was a 21-22 academic year, we were online for almost 85% of that year. So then really by the time I got to my third year, it was like, okay, let's like, what does it mean to be back, right? Post-COVID. So when other schools had already had that for a year, we were like, what does it mean to be back? Well, travel, but then there's new travel protocols or all these things that are happening, right? So you're still kind of figuring it out. And I think one of the things that we realized is we wanted to do everything right away. And we didn't really pace ourselves. So I think we all felt a little bit like, let's do everything. We greenlit everything. And so in terms of like the projects that I've been involved with in my role as deputy principal for teaching and learning in the secondary school, I've helped kind of co-facilitate and co-lead a whole EY12 learning management system review process and implementation.
Oh,
wow. So we changed from one platform to another, and all the training and onboarding and consulting that happens with that. Change is hard. People are very sort of like specific or protective of their past technology. And so, you just have to manage people's emotions because they'd been through this traumatic 2 years of COVID. So then we did this new change, right? And you still kind of have to move it forward, but how do you do so with empathy and compassion for it? And then right after that, we went into our 18-month accreditation self-study.
Okay.
So, we were doing our IB program development plan. We're part of the CIS and WASC organizations. We're accredited by them. So we were doing a whole new process for accreditation, which I was given the opportunity and privilege really to co-chair with a colleague. So we were running that whole process. So, I feel like I was saying to my principal just at our end of year reflection, I said, I feel like maybe going into year 6, I'll finally do the things that I was hoping we would do. And then on top of that, like we're one of the schools that are involved with the Global Impact Diploma, this nascent organization of schools looking to rethink education, especially in those senior years of high school, for whom the IB diploma might not be the best fit.
Yeah. But I went through IB. So
I did too, right?
Tough,
I mean, and I think it's a beautiful program. Like I would, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I think that's not a criticism. That's just a reality.
Yeah.
And I kind of said, I've been a IB student, examiner, coordinated 2 out of the 4 programs. I've done workshops. I've been a parent. Like I've seen it through different lenses. Like, and I do feel like I said, in the aggregate, it's a great program. And I'm really impressed with some of the changes that are happening, especially with the systems transformation work. And I'm also a little bit selfish, and I feel like I want, to be something that we have a little bit more control and autonomy over. So the Global Impact Diploma is a coalition of schools working on things like that. Just like it's a structured program, but there's a lot more school autonomy to run it and develop it. So that's kind of like, those are things that I've been working on over the last kind of couple of years that are pretty exciting.
That sounds pretty exciting. Yeah. Do you also evaluate teachers?
I wouldn't use the word evaluate. I think we'd really try to come through the lens of like coaching and growth, right? So I do spend time in classrooms, and we have a formal process that, we kind of do goal setting with teachers. We talk about what are some of the things you're hoping to get feedback on in your classroom, and how can I be a support to that? So we definitely take like much more of a growth and a model that's focused much more on growth rather than evaluation, right?
Absolutely.
So, like I work with a number of teachers every year. We kind of start the year off like, what are some of your in-class goals? What are some of your out-of-class goals? How can I help support that? What are some things you want me to look for when I go into your classroom? I remember one year a teacher said to me, he's like, Tanay, I feel like I talk too much, which is ironic given my answers on your podcast. And he said, I want you just to time me. And so I went into like, how much of the class am I talking? So, I just had a timer. I went in, every time that teacher spoke, I'd time it, but I'd also like code it for like what they were doing, right? I'm like, well, if you're giving instructions and you're giving feedback, that seems
reasonable.
Like valuable, right? That's valuable stuff. And I said, in a 65-minute class, you actually spoke probably 9 minutes. So it's like proportionally. So it's sometimes it's just sort of like helping people like to be that third data point to be like, actually, you're not doing the thing that you think you're doing. And so actually you should continue to do what you're doing.
Yeah. So you've been in a lot of classrooms, which I think is so cool.
Yeah.
What is a very, very interesting thing you've seen a teacher do?
So recently, I love the notion of the physical space of the classroom as a third teacher. Like, I love that idea. Like, just, like there's this other tool that you have in terms of how you set up your classroom and how you can manipulate the environment to kind of co-teach with you. And so I was in a class recently, kind of like maybe March or April, with a middle school teacher, math teacher. And there was a point at which the teacher was using the lights in the classroom, like the dimmers, to kind of like just set the tone.
Yeah.
Right. And it was just such a simple trick of how they engage the students. And it clearly had been part of the routine, because it doesn't even take like that, that physical or that verbal, like, hey, pay attention, just dims the lights. And the kids got it. They just brought their tone down. They brought and they kind of like recalibrated. So that, like, it's things like that. And, there are a little bit of, I felt really good when I saw that, because, there were things that I was like, oh yeah, I remember doing a bit of that when I was in the classroom. Maybe that, not to that level of sophistication, but toying with those ideas. So that was one thing that I just thought was just a really great, simple tool of like, the third classroom, right? The third teacher. Itself, the space is the third teacher, the second teacher.
Yeah.
Like, how can you use it? So I think I'm always inspired by teachers who don't think about their classrooms as sort of two-dimensional flat spaces, but rather they can actually use the tools in there to really kind of set the mood, set the tone.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
If you were to redesign a classroom, what would it look like?
Oh,
no desk? So
like part of me says yes, but I think there's some practical realities. I think the choice of furniture, I like soft lighting, soft spaces. I think having, that I can't remember exactly who came up with the campfire caves and watering holes, kind of that notion of like each space has a different purpose.
Yeah, it's
not just like, certainly, one of my biggest frustrations with education is that, it feels like we haven't systematically evolved in quite a long time.
Yeah.
And this notion of like rows and, rows, 1.5 meters apart drives me nuts.
And even like, I was talking to someone, I said, look, in that setup, you're looking at the teacher's back.
Totally.
More than their face. Like,
100%.
Because they have to turn around to write something, right? And so
I think the other thing too is like, in our middle school, we issue a laptop, and in the high school, students have to bring their own device. So what I'm actually looking for is how are we getting like more analog in our approach, right? Like, I love it when like the computer's a tool, right? But it's not the teacher.
It's not the teacher.
It's not the teacher. And so Toronto great writer, David Sachs, one of my favorite books is called The Revenge of Analog. And he just talks about the ways in which when you go back to analog tools, how that can be really kind of just a great way to re-engage students. I'm always looking for, and I'm
probably refreshing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you just, everyone's on their computers, and I know we're talking about, the anxious generation and all that sort of the social emotional impact of like being too immersed in tech. So how do we dial it back and, find better balance between our use of tech? So,
would you, and maybe Eunice has this or not, because some schools I've spoken to, they have policies around phone usage, and they don't let you, and some of them are like more easygoing.
We don't have one yet. And it's interesting because there isn't consensus, and maybe that's the point. You'll never get to consensus because I think you can make a justification.
There'll always be someone on either side.
You could make a justification for why a phone, when taught effectively, like part of the job of an educator is teaching students how to use the tool, right? And then partnering with parents so that you have shared understanding of like what happens, in the house versus in the school. So we don't have one yet. We're working on it. I think. It's the same with schools that rushed out an AI policy right away, right? You just want to have something that's a little future-proof and just that level of malleable enough that you don't feel like you have to rewrite the policy every 6 weeks or every 6 months, because these things evolve so quickly.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So, and you want something that's a bit more malleable.
Totally.
Absolutely. You also support, from what we have understood, a lot of staff recruitment.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to know, what does an Eunice Hanoi interview look like? Like, if I was to interview for a role, what would that look like?
So we spend a lot of time focusing, especially in the first round, on just like mission alignment. Like, of course, we want to make sure that if we're hiring you to teach, orchestra, that
you actually know what you're doing.
You got to know how to play the violin, right? Like, one would assume. And so we do, you do those checks and balances through the screening process. But a lot of our first round is really less about subject specific and more about like, here's our statement on equity. like, how do you see equitable practice happening in your classroom for all students, right? Here's our at UNIS Hanoi, we believe this about assessment. What is
What's your
your
take?
vision on assessment, right? So we really try and focus on like philosophical fit. And then we go into, if you get past that point, then the next round would be kind of like more subject specific.
Right?
Okay. Like what are some of the, how do you engage with specific type of like orchestral learning or math learning or whatever the subject it is you're interviewing for. So that's kind of how it goes. And we usually have a 3-step process. And yeah, I just, it's a really great way to meet different teachers. And one of the things, and I'm continue to hold myself to this, is that, and I recognize not everyone is able to, so I fully acknowledge that. Even on our team, it's not always possible. But if you have a first round interview that I screen you, that I do your first round for, and you don't make it past that, after our recruiting season is done, I send an email and I'm just like, hey, if you want to have a 15-minute debrief, about like just some feedback here, some reason, just to give you some coaching. I feel very strongly about that, partly because in the short story that I shared, like someone did that for me. And I feel very strongly that being able to pay that forward is really important.
That person might come back the next year,
you never
right?
know. Absolutely. Like I've had situations where people have, kind of reapplied and been successful, or just have been able to get another job somewhere else because you give them that feedback.
And then they use it.
And they use it and they're successful. And so I recognize that that's not feasible for everybody. I try to. I hold myself to that, but I think those things are important.
Is there a certain skill that you think is very underrated that teachers should have? We usually maybe don't look for it, but you're like, teachers should have
question. I think in this context, so you go back to what are things you would look for. I think one of the earlier questions is, I think being able to speak to the way in which you care for the whole child. Like you're there to educate the whole child. That's pastoral care, that's social emotional. And of course, we have specialists, we have counselors, we have vice principals, we have other people that support at a specific level those pieces. But I think the idea of saying, I'm subject teacher X and that's what I do, that's an antiquated model of what a teacher looks like. And I think in 2025, I think teachers really are much more about like caring for the whole child.
You can learn that stuff later.
Through the lens of their subject, right? So of course we want you to be able to teach science or math or any of the other subjects with PE. But how are you showing that you care for a child? Are you engaged? Are you willing to engage with us in our mentorship program? Do you coach outside of school hours? What are, when I say like outside of school hours, meaning co-curricularly.
Do you want to spend time? Do you want to invest your energy?
100%. How are you demonstrating that you get to know the kids, right?
Right.
Because I think that's so important. And like, how have you demonstrated over time that you have the potential to be that kid's special person in a school, right? Like, and I think that's really important.
No, I 100% agree. I think it's and do you ask the teachers for the UN goals? Like, are you like, tell me tell it to me right now?
I feel like that's such a maybe we should.
Maybe it's a naive question.
Yeah, I feel like someone would be like, you asked me a question. What's your most difficult goal to teach? I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to remember that. But no, I think we really try and keep it much more. I mean, I think we talk about, how do you, like, we use the lens of equity, like how do you embed equitable practice into your classroom? So I think one of the things you'd asked, maybe it was on the when we discussed questions, is that what are like some things that are important to me as in my philosophy as an educator?
Absolutely.
I 100% believe that students' identities need to be honored in the classroom. Like it's part of universal design for learning. It's part of tier 1 instruction. But for me, like students need to see themselves in the classroom. Like that's a non-negotiable for my educational philosophy. I would love to look you in the eye and say that happens 100% of the time in all our classes. But it's something we're working towards, right? And I think what was really great for me is that when I started my career, I had this innate sense that was a personal belief or philosophy, but I never had to fight for it. Like I worked at a school and I worked in departments that shared that philosophy. So right off the bat, it's been an expectation of mine since my first day of teaching that in some way, shape, or form, whether, the choice of books that we select, the history that we teach, those perspectives that we bring in. I remember talking about like gender identity, like gender being on a spectrum in my first year of teaching. 16, 17 years ago in a TOK class, right? So these things have been
it's been embedded
I've been, and most importantly, been supported by a school to do that. Like that's a gift that I've taken with me from my first day of teaching and been able to apply in other contexts. So
no, that is special. And you've spoke about this a little bit before as well, but you spend a lot of time coaching as well, right? I think that's such an important role where someone could just come bounce an idea off. And you just have someone to, whiteboard something with. What's the most common struggle you see teachers face?
I think that's a good question. I think they tend to be varied. I think one of the things people are struggling with now, especially maybe in more senior level classes, is this notion of like what to think versus how to think. Right?
Okay.
Like I think, and I would struggle with that too. Like it's hard to, I think divorcing yourself from your own personal biases and beliefs in our highly polarized political climate is a tricky thing to do. So how do you treat your classroom as a space where voices can be heard, things can be challenged, but you're not necessarily sort of proselytizing or bringing in your own personal belief and bias in a way that might actually create a sense of that might undermine the psychological safety for another kid. So I think teachers are really struggling with that. Like right now, it's like, how do I, and I'm not saying I have all the answers or that it's perfect, but it's just that sense of like, how do you kind of create a space where you can acknowledge different perspectives, can have respectful and healthy debate and conversation, and still walk away with a sense of community and humanity, right? And then what are your non-negotiables? Like here are the things that we don't believe. Like we wouldn't. This is incongruent with our values, with our norms, and so I think that's something that teachers have. I would imagine is something that's quite common as well. Not uniquely in our school.
Oh, I would 100% agree. I mean, I think it's also one of those things where that also shows that a lot of teachers care so deeply to even 100%. Want to solve that problem, right?
So, I mean, it's a good problem to have, right? That people are like,
and the fact that your class is honest and open enough to be, I think that's also in some way a good sign. That means you've created an environment where it's really comfortable for kids to express who they are or what they want to share.
And there are challenges that come with being a UN school. There are certain positions that the UN takes that we have to abide to. Right? And so, I mean, it's how do you negotiate that?
You can't just go all out and make your own rules,
and,
right?
That notion of like, and again, I can't, the person to attribute this quote escapes me, but there's this notion of like, is education a political act or not, right? Like, so like I struggle with that a little bit. And I think some of our teachers are trying to figure out what's the right balance, right? So
you're also, you're in this leadership role. And you're also, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but completing your doctorate. That sounds like a lot of work, first of all. So one, what's that about? And like, what's the why behind that? Was that like one day you woke up, you're like, I really want to do my doctorate, or did it originate from something?
I was inspired by my boss who had completed the program that I'm doing. And so he kind of gave me the push a little bit. So I appreciated that. My doctorate is actually not related to what I do day to day. And I think that's part of the reason I actually wanted to do it. So my doctorate is focused on recruitment, retention, building an equitable framework for recruitment, retention, and succession planning for international school headships. So it's really not related to, I mean, of course, there's a trickle down to teaching and learning.
But it's not like directly associated
It's not a
to
direct
teaching
thing. And I think that's actually one of the reasons I stay engaged with it, because it gives me something else that I can engage with outside of my day-to-day job. Although there's so many things like in terms of change management processes and, change models that have been part of this doctorate that have been able to bring in to my other piece. So, I think that was part of the reason why.
And then how would you advise folks to balance it? Because I mean, teaching and education is such a demanding role. So does the reality of it look like there is sacrifice? There are weekends you burn away and you got to do that?
And I was doing mine asynchronously in 12 hours ahead. So, like I'm doing, there are a few of us in our cohort who are working in Hong Kong and China and Vietnam. But, it's like 5 a.m. mornings, right? It's, there have been a few weekends and sacrifices and, spending spring break at home so I can finish that third chapter. And again, like so fortunately having the support at home to do that is great. After I finish this podcast, I got to go work on my edits and submit them. So, I think I am also, and this is like, no shade to the program, I'm also looking forward to being done.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think there's a sense of like you're so close.
You'll fulfill. Yeah.
I feel like that bucket will be filled. I look forward to reading for pleasure.
Yeah.
I look forward to like, mindlessly watching a TV show.
Yeah.
Which although some might say I still do, but but still, yeah. So
but at the back of your mind, you're still thinking about your
for sure. Like
yeah.
It's absolutely like I'm like, oh, do I need to do this? What I need to make a change for? So yeah, it's good.
It's a tough journey, but it's worth it.
It's totally. I'm excited for it. I'm glad I was inspired to do it. I'm glad that I had the right support around me, both professionally and personally. Yeah. The school's been amazing about supporting it. So like that's a gift.
That's
right?
wonderful.
So, yeah.
All right. I'm going to shift gears into our next round, Beyond the Classroom.
Sure.
So I'll shoot you a question.
Yeah.
And you can give me a response in under a minute.
Yeah, no problem.
First one, what is one interesting fact about yourself?
I love learning about different aspects of the world, of different aspects of things to influence my work in education. So one of my favorite books of all time is Range by David Epstein. He talks about how generalists survive or thrive in a specialized world. So that part is like really good. So right now I'm reading two books, or that once I finish this chapter, but there are two books on my shelf. One is The History and Life of Jay Dilla, who is a rap producer, and the other is The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. So both these people have like inspired all the music I listen to, and I just want to absorb and learn from them and find little nuggets that I can bring to my role in education. The same is true. I love reading about chefs. So I really try and think about like education through the lens of like that sort of like generalist mindset. What are ways you can mine other industries
and just take pieces and learn from them.
Pieces and learn from them, like Tinker Hatfield and sneaker design. Yeah. What are things that he does that maybe there's nothing there, but I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. That is very cool. What is one misconception about education that maybe frustrates you? You think a lot of people
that we're not agile enough, because we are. Like we went online very quickly, not necessarily in the best way possible, and the circumstances around it were not great. But I think there's this notion of like education's like an oil tanker. It takes years and years to turn it. I think if we really find the right motivation, we can be far more nimble and agile than we think we are. That's one that, I feel strongly about that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think a lot of people...
Like, if you just find the right people, the right environment, I think you can make massive change, meaningful, sustained, in a cautious but careful and innovative way in a short amount of time.
Yeah. I think we also have to remember that education serves our future generation.
100%.
And to make change isn't to say, oh yeah, do this and do that. It's a lot more of a, I believe, it's a lot more of a thoughtful question mark that needs to be answered than 100%. Just saying, new technology, it's in, right?
For sure.
So,
absolutely. Yeah. So I feel like we can be more agile than we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the coolest project you have seen a student create?
Oh, you asked this question. I saw this. I was like, oh my gosh. This may be recency bias playing into it. So I acknowledge it might not be the coolest, but it's one of the more unique examples I've seen. A student at our school in grade 10 did their personal project, and they used K-pop to like explain the stock market. And I was like, that is genius.
Yeah.
Like, what a way to engage kids. What a way, like, just find that hook. That was really good.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not doing justice to the thousands
Maybe we
of
can get a copy of it. You
know?
Like
I know, right? But I was like, and so again, acknowledging recency bias, but I've seen kids do so many creative things, like just that are, again, really what's the coolest ones are the ones that they're like so deeply passionate and committed to it.
Yeah.
That's the one that makes me, that when they find that thing and they take it to the furthest place possible, that's what excites me.
Yeah. My last question on the rapid fire, what is something you have learned from a student?
I think I've sharpened my empathy knife from students. Sometimes I tend to be a little bit like, just power through. And I think having those conversations with students and really, have you thought about this? In my first year, I did a shadow a student, which is something I recommend every leader does.
What is that?
Like I shadowed a student for a day.
Oh.
Like I just sat with them. I didn't quite ride the bus with them, but I basically met them at 8:10, and I spent the whole day. So free periods, I went into their classes. I was a student, and just sort of seeing our school's experience. I was new that year, so seeing our experience through those eyes,
that's pretty cool.
Was really
I've never heard
awesome.
That before.
Yeah, like I just, the kid had 2 free periods that day. I sat and hung out with his buddies. We played basketball. like, I'm way too old to be doing that, but it was lots of fun. And so I think any chance you get to like spend time with kids and really see things through their eyes. And it's not, it wasn't the first time anyone, I think many people have done this before, but it was such a simple way. Take a day and just, spend time with a kid and learn through that lens has been really, really powerful.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually a very cool one.
Yeah.
I'm going to shift gears into our final question.
Sure.
So we have a question that's been left for, by our previous guests.
Okay.
I may or may not ask you to.
Okay.
And then I'll give you the opportunity to leave a question for one of our next guests, if that works for you. All right, let's see. I've got one that I particularly thought would be an interesting one to ask you.
Okay.
And I'll ask you too. So this first one is from Brendan Brown.
Okay.
He is the Director of Education at Toronto Catholic District School Board.
Okay.
And his question is, why have you decided to serve in private education rather than public? If you had to do it all over again, would you make the same decision?
Oh, that is a great question. When I started, I was desperate to work at TDSB.
Yeah.
I was on the eligible to hire list. I was doing my internship at Monarch Park Collegiate at Danforth and Coxwell in the IB office. And I had the offer from Branksome. And I went to the principal supervising my internship at the time at Monarch Park. And I'm like, what do I do here? I really want to work in public education. I believe in public education. And I think it goes back to that piece. Like he was like, take the job at Branksome. Like it's the right place. It's the right fit for you. So that's a blind spot in my career is I've never worked in public education.
Yeah.
I think the ship might be a little bit too past the harbor for me to kind of do it to revisit that. But so it wasn't necessarily by intention, although I would say my schooling and the experiences I had made me, I think I was a better fit for what independent schools were looking for when I went into the classroom.
Yeah.
When I went into education.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, going to ask you one more that Emily just left with us.
Okay.
Emily McLean, for those that don't know, head of junior school at Branksome Hall.
Okay.
Her question is, what is a leadership lesson you learned the hard way?
All of them. I mean, like, honestly, I remember I remember my first few years of leadership. I think especially in my first year is that this notion of socializing an idea. Like, Cotter has this 8 stages of change. And then this notion of like building a coalition, just socializing the idea first. And I didn't do that with just a proposed change that we were thinking about. I can't even remember what the change was, right? But I think I surprised people in a way that was probably seen as less than desirable with the decision that was being made or whatever proposed change that we were doing. And then I felt flustered and I felt like I might even have to walk it back, which then kind of like, and I'm all for that. Like if you know you've made the wrong decision, walk it back. Like I think that's not a bad thing to do. But I just felt like in that moment, this notion of like, I didn't really beta test this with the right people. I didn't get it in front of the right people. So I think people were quite frustrated and surprised. And I think that it kind of created a sense of like, I wasn't being as transparent as I would have desired to be as a leader. And I'm not always able to hold myself to that exact standard all the time of that desired level of transparency, but it's something I think about a lot. I don't want people to feel like something is being done to them as opposed to something that's being done with them.
Yeah. That's really fair, to be honest. And I think it's something that's very thoughtful to say.
Yeah, I mean, people who work with me might say, "What are you talking about, man? Like you do the complete opposite." But I think aspirationally we strive for that, and I think we hit it more than we don't.
Yeah. No, that's a lovely answer.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give you an opportunity to leave a question for our next guest. Yeah. I'll slide this over to you.
Yeah.
And feel free to leave, Do
you want me to say it out or?
You could say it out to the camera too. You could also just write it.
My question, which is one that I heard from my principal, is one that I love, is like, what is a question that you wished I would have been asked?
Yeah.
And I think it's such a great one.
It's a lovely one.
Yeah. So I'm going to write that down.
I like it. Yeah.
I do have a friend who once told me that in a job interview they were in, the final question was, tell me a joke.
Yeah. That's so much stress.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
Oh, man. So that I didn't put that one down for the next person, but yeah.
Yeah. I feel like they would have just been like, I'm out.
Yeah,
I'm out.
No,
Tap
thanks.
out.
Yeah, like I'm going to take my resume back and
should have done this, Dheeraj.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks. But no, I think And if then people want to answer it,
Yeah,
ask it and answer.
exactly.
Then
you
they're
two birds, one stone, right?
Exactly.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your space.
No,
You're
for
such an
sure.
incredible individual. I could probably talk to you for hours.
Thank you.
I could tell you're a great coach as well. You could just sense that.
I mean, you've had some heavy hitters on your podcast, so it's a real privilege to be included with the likes of Grace and Leanne and ACR Allison. And I know once you start naming names, you forget people. But these are people that, as I listen to your podcast, I'm like, you're asking great questions. You're surfacing some really awesome things. So it's been an absolute blast. So
I appreciate it. Same goes for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
That was fun.